So this is Jasmine Katrina Sweet, who is with me today. Hi.
Good morning, everybody. Well, good afternoon to, depending on where you are.
Right.
East Coast France, it's already noon.
We are so excited to have this conversation. Before we get started, I just wanted to give a little bit of background, both for Jasmine and for Style Blueprint. So to start with, I hope that you're following Jasmine on Instagram. It's at Jasmine Katrina. She's got like, I don't know, 65,000 followers. So you definitely want to be part of that mix. She just has a wonderful positive message that she puts out. Plus the fact that she has gorgeous photos. So you will love following her. She's also a marketing professional for iHeart, and she also consults on marketing projects. So if you need help in diversifying your message, that's something that is of particular interest to her. And we will be sending out all that contact information at the end of this to everyone who registered today. And then a little bit about Style Blueprint. For those of you who may not be familiar, Style Blueprint is a digital lifestyle publication. This is our 12th year in business. We have over 5 million unique readers a year, all of them organic. All we've done from the beginning is digital. So we know digital really well. We know email marketing well. We know digital marketing well. We know social media marketing well. So if you are a local business trying to get in touch with a local audience, that is where we excel. We do a great job there. So if that is of interest to you, get in touch with Style Blueprint. All right. So with that, we are going to get started with how to nurture diversity in your business and personal life. And Jasmine has put together an amazing presentation. And I'm going to interject a few questions along the way. Some of you all sent us questions this morning as well. Thank you for those. So Jasmine, let's get started.
Let's do it. As Liza mentioned, she and I have been having these conversations behind the scenes and figuring out the best way to condense information that has transpired over years in events and life experiences. And so that's what we did in this short PowerPoint. And we want to foster a conversation that will come forth after this and not just through the 1 hour that we're doing this. So I said yesterday on my Instagram stories, I know that we can't change the world in 1 hour, but we're going to try to open some hearts and minds to a new way of thinking. So like Liza mentioned, I've been in marketing for about 10 years. I've done marketing in every different genre or industry you can think of, from the financial industry to healthcare, to health insurance, to higher education. I'm currently working in media and tech. And so I have all that experience, and I have 30 years of life experience that I'm going to be speaking from today. And so that is how we got to this place of how to nurture diversity in your business and personal life, and then also going to give you some tips on marketing.
Perfect.
So, racism, allyship, diversity, police brutality, equal opportunities, slavery, Black culture, Black Lives Matter. These are just a few of the key terms that you've probably been seeing all across your social media, hopefully been having private conversations about. And what led us to the conversation about the words that you're seeing above is over 400 years of oppression that Black people have faced. So even after the Emancipation Proclamation, which essentially freed the slaves, there would be a myriad of other events that occurred in history that still didn't lead to prosperity overall for Black people. And so that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to give you a little bit of the background of what led to this conversation that we're having today, or the uprising, as some people have noted it as on social media, because you can't talk about the solution unless we talk about the 400 years that led up to it. And that's why I said in this 1 hour today, how can we possibly cover 400 years of things that have oppressed or disenfranchised the Black community? But we're going to talk about it step by step. Liza and I are going to get as candid as we can and answer as many questions as we can to the best of our knowledge and our experience, our life experience. So,
and I just want to interject real quick, Jasmine, and say that just as she said about the history, it was a surprise to me when we started talking about this, that Jasmine brought up several examples of people who really did not know Black history. in as much as to say, tell me about the slavery thing. I don't know about it. And I was like, what? I cannot believe that. So just from that, we want to make sure that everyone has some of these facts in their head before we start going forward on how to increase diversity in your life.
Yeah, like Liza mentioned, I've had a couple of different conversations. One conversation was probably 10 years ago, and one of my friends said, I had no idea Martin Luther King was killed, assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And she also didn't know the context behind it. She didn't know why he was in Memphis, which he was in Memphis for the sanitation strikes. And so growing up in rural West Tennessee, I'm originally from Jackson, Tennessee. I guess I was privy to a lot of this. My dad actually rebuilt churches that were burnt in West Tennessee as hate crimes. And so I guess I was privy to all of this as a child. My grandfather ran for office in his small town in West Tennessee. And so I did have access to it. And I will say our school system, I would say, did a pretty decent job of making sure that we had access to Black history. But there are a lot of people who just don't know. And I think that was another reason why Liza and I definitely wanted to lead this conversation, is to give context to what we're dealing with today. Because it's not something that just had a concrete end because slavery, the Emancipation Proclamation, ended slavery. So I'm just going to call out a few of them because, like I mentioned, we only have an hour. So first off, the Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves, essentially. But it wasn't until Juneteenth, which was 2 years later, that someone came down to Texas and said, slavery is over. So this is 2 years after the fact. And I'm pointing this out first and foremost because I want you guys to keep this one in the back of your heads. Imagine if they had social media during this time and how fast the news would have traveled and how progressive things would have been. So whether you are a media maven like me and you're using social media 24/7 for your full-time job and also for other stuff, or you're just someone who enjoys using social media to keep in contact with your friends, you are a catalyst in changing things because you're a member of a digital landscape that they didn't have, that our people 10 years, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago didn't have. And so I think staying silent on issues in a time when you have a microphone that's going to reach no less than 50 people. I know we all have an audience of more than 50 people, and you have to think about the domino effect of those 50 people and their audiences and their audiences and their audiences. So I use that as an example because I just can't even fathom not knowing news until 2 years later. But then how are we dealing with some of the things that we're dealing with today when we have the platforms right at our fingertips to get the information out there and to be opinionated and to ask questions and to be curious about all the things that we're facing? So keep that in the back of your head as we're going through the workshop. So next up, Jim Crow laws. So these laws took place for over nearly 100 years, and they segregated Black people from white people. Visually, Black people had to visit a Black water fountain, a Black restroom. They could not use white water fountains or white restrooms. And this is in a day and age when my mom was growing up. She grew up she was born in 1954, my dad too. And it wasn't until 1968 that this was done for. But these were laws that I want you guys to acknowledge too, because it's not like it was just what somebody said. These were laws. If you broke the law, there were consequences for this. So when you see activists like Congressman John Lewis, who laid down their lives for the justice for all, that's exactly what they were going against. We're going to move into an education example. So Brown versus Board of Education, again, didn't happen until the 60s. And so you're talking about my mom, a little girl, back during this time. I just imagine her going and integrating into a white school system as a little Black girl, and as did her siblings. She has two older brothers and she's got a little sister. And this is what they're up against as children. And so even further, I just want to call out some things that over the time we're still facing. So Black people couldn't get into certain colleges. So there was an option to go to HBCUs, which I don't have a lot of time to go into the context or the history of HBCUs, but I really want you guys to go and do the research and learn more about historically Black colleges and universities and how you can support them. The Memphis State Eight were the first Black students to step foot on the University of Memphis campus in the fall of 1968. And that is we're not too far removed from it. I stepped foot on that same campus in the fall of 2007. And it brings tears to my eyes when I envision the 8 of them stepping foot on that campus and also being young adolescents who were walking into an environment that was not inclusive of them. Okay, bring on the tears. But I just am so grateful that someone went before us. And so we're 5 decades removed from that when I was stepping foot on that campus. And then you move a little further and we start diving into some stats about education. And I'm just coming from a higher education perspective in this instance. Only 2.7% of physician assistants are Black. 0.3% are Black men. And there's 254 PA schools in the United States, and some rarely ever admit minority students. And this is the case with a lot of stringent admissions processes. Black students aren't getting in, so they have a higher chance of getting in at a historically Black college or university. I just spent the past 4 years of my life working at the first African-American medical college in the United States, Meharry Medical College, which is right here in Nashville, Tennessee. And they are currently leading the efforts for coronavirus testing right here in Nashville. But there's so many people in Nashville who don't even see or recognize the efforts that this college, this historically Black college, is doing for the underserved community in Nashville and abroad. So consider that there are 200,000 dentists in the United States, and 6,000 of them, 3%, are Black. Most of them are being trained, 42% of them are being trained at Meharry, which is right here in Nashville. And Dr. Hildreth, whom is the president of Meharry Medical College, makes note of this often, and he definitely does an excellent job telling the story of how HBCUs have nurtured young professionals, even amongst the educational disenfranchisement that Black people have faced. Systemic racism, I'll go back to the Jim Crow laws. Again, they were laws. There are other laws in place that have also affected Black people. So you end up with issues like mass incarceration or issues in the criminal justice system. And again, all of these issues are deep dive issues that we could go even further down into, but we only have 1 hour to talk about these things. And as you can imagine, these are all situations that my brother, my mom, my aunt, my uncle, my sisters, my dad, every person of color, Black people have had to face these issues. Voting Rights Act of 1965. I was talking to my grandmother and she was like, yeah, I mean, we had to either pay a polling tax or there was literacy tests. They had to jump through hoops to get to the polls just to have a voice. And so it's so important for us today to make sure that all we have to do is get in our car. All we have to do is walk across town. All we have to do is hop on the metro or the train and make our way to be heard. People marched for this. They marched for all of us to have a voice in a collective way.
Which is so important to remember during this voting year, that we all need to get out and vote and to encourage each other to get out. It's not just about you, it's about who you can pull with you.
Absolutely. I saw a chart the other day that was looking at the 2016 election and how many people weren't even registered to vote. And so you would think, having notated all these things historically, that we would see an urgency, or we would feel an urgency to go vote, but we're still dealing with the remnants of all the things that have happened, because you have people that are tired and you have people that are just like, they don't know how to move forward. But voting is a start, even when we feel like we don't know which way to turn or what to do. So I just wanted to give you guys some background of what led to those initial terms that I mentioned at the beginning of this. This is just a few of the examples, but we're going to keep going. So now you're aware of these happenings. How do you become a catalyst for change? And I notated these in two different ways. So there is a fear of communication. So you might feel like, I don't know Black history. I don't understand Black culture. I might say the wrong thing. I'm just not even sure how to begin with a conversation. But then there's also a failure to communicate at all. And so there's these assumptions. So you've watched movies, or you've watched the news, or you've listened to media. And I work in media. I know how I went to school for broadcast journalism. I thought I was going to be a news reporter. Those stories can be spent in whichever way people want to. And traditionally and historically, media has given stereotypes, and you pair those stereotypes with the historical context, and you're going to go off of assumptions, and then you may choose not to have any sort of conversation at all because you don't feel like you have a place in the conversation based off of, well, that's their problem, not my problem. But it's all of our problem. So the fear of communication and then the failure to communicate have to be abolished in order for us to move forward at all. So
I know that when we were talking, throughout this, we talked about how it's not that many of us aren't having these conversations. We just happen to be having them with people who look like us. And we need to make sure that we're having a conversation with other people as well. And I had brought up that I've heard, some of my friends say, I get scared to say anything because I've seen it written, especially in social media, hey, do your homework. I'm not here to do your homework. And then with that statement, it's, well, what can I ask and what can't I ask? And we had a really good discussion about that. And I would love it if you could, empower everyone with, we can have conversations, but what that exactly means.
right. So it means that in order for you to better define your own intention, you need to do the research. It's like going into a job interview, and the interviewer expects you to know something about the company so that they can understand your intention for even wanting to do the job. So there's this level of trust that has to be built based off of that. And so when you're wanting to ask questions about someone's culture, which is a very sensitive and often closed off conversation, doing the research allows the person to know that you're interested, that you are coming from a genuine place. And so it's not just us saying, well, go do your homework. It's us saying you should do the research so that you understand the context, and then your intention for learning will be more clear. And so we can have that open dialogue, because when you just ask someone a question and you haven't done the research, it's clear. It's like going into the job interview and you don't know what the company does. You're not sure of your skill set and how you can apply the skill set to the job. And so the job interviewer is immediately going to close off the application and close out your opportunity. And so I think in order to keep the doors open, you have to show that you are wanting to learn more about the culture. I was just talking to my sister yesterday, and one of her best friends is Asian, and she was like, I don't ask him much about his culture. And so she was just saying, maybe she should start fostering those conversations, but she also hasn't done enough research of her own to start asking those questions. And so I think in order to have better intention and to understand your place in the conversation, you have to do your own research. Even as Black people, we're constantly doing our own research. I mean, we don't know a lot of our ancestors. We don't know a lot of that history. So we're piecing together things along the way. We're trying to understand our own ancestral landscape. I'm talking to my grandmother, trying to understand these things. Right. So I think even as Black people, we're still doing the research too. And we're also living the Black experience, which I refer to as Black. This is our lifestyle every day. And so it's kind of, when someone questions it, it can be a sensitive topic if you see that someone hasn't done the research. And I think, like I said, in order to keep those doors open, in the intent, well, then in the trust being built, I think you have to know that someone has put in the effort to learn a little bit more about you.
That makes so much sense, and I love how you described it as the job interview part. And we've all been part of a book club where we show up and it's obvious who's trying to make statements, hasn't read the book, to put it in context. So yeah, we
and I also think that these are lessons that we learned early on too. I mean, I remember in 8th grade readings when we'd show up to read, I don't know, Huckleberry Finn, and the teacher could easily tell who had not read the chapter in the book. And I think when you're dealing with historical context, but also a Black person's lifestyle, and you're wanting to learn more about the culture in general, then you have to be willing to do the research in order to take the deep dive into the conversation, because it's not something that we can talk about in 30 minutes. It's not something that we can explain to you in one day. It is a lifestyle that we're constantly living. And even as a 30-year-old woman versus a 17-year-old woman walking on the University of Memphis campus, I couldn't articulate what that meant to be able to go to the University of Memphis in 2007, but I can articulate what it means to me now, having graduated from the University of Memphis, when I look back and I see 8 people who did it for me in 1968. But I'm 30 years old just now tying this all together. So I think when you're asking people questions about their culture, we're still all figuring this out. And so all of us collectively have to do the research in order to, like I said, make sure that our intent is in the right direction.
So all of the white people watching, when you, or non-Black people, because of course there's other races. I didn't mean to just exclude, just for white people, but when you see that right now, because that is something that we all see on social media, I'm not here to do your homework. That's what that means. It doesn't mean we want to stop the conversation and that you need to know everything. It just says put some effort in so we can have a quality conversation.
Yeah, it does. Definitely. That's a good way of putting it. So this isn't about meeting quotas as traditional diversity inclusion terminology recommended. A lot of times when you hear diversity and inclusion, especially as Black people, it can be a little bit of a deterrent, because we hear diversity and inclusion and we see everyone put up the post and say, we want to amplify voices, but we're not necessarily seeing the action behind it. And so I think we have to break ground on what diversity and inclusion actually means. And we have to be honest about our own networks. And that goes for everybody. I was talking to someone and they said, well, none of my white friends have checked on me during the time of the George Floyd incident. And I said, well, have you talked to your white friends previously about the things that you face as a Black person? And they said, well, no. I said, okay, well, the doors haven't been opened to have any sort of conversation, even after something as traumatic as George Floyd. And so I think we really have to be honest with ourselves about our networks. And I'm speaking to everybody when I say that. Do you have cross-racial relationships? Do you have friends that don't look like you? Do your kids have friends that don't look like them? At the next event that you're hosting, have you genuinely evaluated the guest list? Is your allyship authentic? Is this a trending moment, or are you afterwards going to find some books, find some podcasts, start to cultivate some conversations, get over the embarrassment of it, get over the nervousness of it? I was nervous 10 minutes before this webinar. I was messaging Liza and Megan saying, I am so nervous. But I think at some point you have to be honest about it, and that's the only way that we're going to break ground, like I said. Are you advocating when you have the chance, and not just when we're facing an issue or a situation such as George Floyd's situation? Are you bearing through difficult conversations? The conversations are not going to be pleasant conversations for anybody. For Black people to say, we feel oppressed or we feel disenfranchised is not something that's easy to say. It's not something that's easy to even come to terms with when you realize that you've had to deal with hair discrimination, or when someone has said something racially offensive towards you. It's not something that feels good for us to walk through every day. It's not going to be comfortable to have any of these conversations. And back to the point of networks, I have frequently had conversations with my friends that don't look like me. And I think when the George Floyd incident happened and people started to post things, my friends did reach out to me, a few of them, and we had conversations. And I think it was because I had conversations with them prior to, so the door was open and they knew that they could ask questions. I often bring up the example of I have two photographers that I work with who are both white women, and we have tons of conversations even about editing of skin tone. And I'm like, please don't make me a white woman. I am a brown girl. We're having these conversations, or we're having conversations. I tell them like about how I want to be portrayed in the imagery that we're shooting, and how I can't do the same thing that maybe a white woman can do because of the societal marginalization that is placed on Black women. And so I'm having these conversations. And so afterwards, one of my photographers, she asked me a question about skin tone. And I have no problem answering that conversation because the door is open, and
Right.
we've worked together, and she knows that. And I've acknowledged and been honest with myself about my networks. And so I think you have to ask all these questions to yourself. And you have to be willing to have the difficult conversations. I was going back and forth with one of my photographers about some editing, and she was like, well, I like to edit this way. And I said, I understand, you're creative, this is your craft, you like to edit this way, but Black people prefer to be in our original tones, our melanin.
Yeah.
You should edit this way when you're shooting Black people. And so
And what a great lesson for her to have the opportunity to learn how to photograph Black people in a respectful way, that she was just doing it, treating everyone the same, which hey, I've been victim to my own, false thinking that way, treat everyone the same, because you also, well, men, women, Black, white, different cultures also need to be treated for their culture.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And especially in a world where creative jobs are becoming more prevalent. So everything is digital. So everything that we're putting out has to be evaluated a certain way. And so I think you being able to nurture those those cross-racial relationships is going to further help you in every other area of your life. And it's going to start to make sense in ways that you didn't think it was, because both of my photographers are really incredible. Rachel Brass Penny Photography and Jennifer Cody Photography. They are two of the best photographers in Nashville. I've been working with them for years. And we've had so many conversations about all of this behind the scenes, and their clientele is opened up to where they can shoot. I think you're going to see that once you start to implement some of these things, some of these measures, that it's going to change in different facets of your life. Like I mentioned before, this is just an hour. We can only do so much in this hour, but I think this is going to start opening doors.
Well, and I love how you talked about the guest list, because there's different stages of life where you have the availability to interact with more people. For example, people who have kids in school. Well, typically in school there are a lot of different races there, and hey, you're getting to know people, you're inviting parents over for a dinner. It's a great opportunity to get to know people who don't look like you, and in that way it's not a coffee to be like, tell me about how we're different, just like get to know people in a very casual setting, so that later you can have those conversations.
Absolutely. Over time it'll start to make sense. You'll be comfortable in the setting. You will have those stereotypes that you saw on TV, or that you heard on the radio, or what have you, or saw on social media. You will be more inclusive of Black people, or people who don't look like you. And yeah, so ask yourself these questions. So we're going to jump right into some specifics. So at work, become an ally in your work environment. Be inclusive in your organization to Black people and people of color. I talked to Liza the other day, and oftentimes I've been the only Black person in many circles, specifically jobs. One of my jobs, there were over 100 people in the marketing department and probably 2 Black people in the marketing department. And as you can imagine, I was 23 when I was working in this marketing department. And so all my friends are still in college in Memphis having a good old time. And then here I am in this whole new city, and I'm one of a few, and I'm trying to understand. It's not that I wasn't used to it. I've grown up around all different ethnicities. I feel like I went to an all-white church growing up, but my high school was mostly Black. I've had a pretty diverse childhood. I went to the University of Memphis, which is it is the epitome of diversity. And they do an excellent job with promoting diversity. And so it's not that I was having any sort of culture shock, but it would be nice if when you're in those settings that people in authoritative roles would be inclusive and bring you along and would share your ideas and would promote you, or you do see opportunities for yourself to climb that ladder. I was telling Liza yesterday that all of the Black people for this specific organization worked down the street in a whole different setting in the customer service area, which is not the most comfortable thing as a young Black woman to see something like that. It's like, how do we see ourselves as a CEO of a company when nobody is in those roles? So if you are in a position where you're able to do this, and you don't have to be a CEO or a CMO or a director or a VP or any of that to do this, you can make people feel inclusive by asking people to lunch, by meeting for coffee, by having a skill set exchange at work. Maybe you are a data analyst and you want to learn how to code an email. Let's meet up for 30 minutes and let's have a quick tutorial about it. It's about being inclusive and diversifying your skills, diversifying your skill set as well. It's about being open to build those relationships and building the trust. Understanding microaggressions that Black people have to face in organizations. When we say Black Lives Matter, it doesn't mean that all lives don't matter. So responding with statements like all lives matter, white privilege doesn't exist, immediately, those are closed statements. Those are closed microaggressions that prevent us from having any sort of progressive conversation to move forward. And it's closing the door for you and for me. It's closing the door for everybody to not have those open conversations. I'll go back to the hair discrimination one.
Because that was one that I had to say to Jasmine when we were going through this. I was like, I didn't know that was the thing. I mean, and it was like, if we hadn't known each other well enough, I wouldn't have been able to, I would have just been quiet. But I was like, wait, that's a thing? So
yeah,
it's a thing.
Yeah. So we were talking about it because hair is often a way to creatively express yourself. And for Black people, I can wear my hair curly like this, or I can put it in a nice tight bun up on the top of my head, which I love to do, or I can slick it back in a ponytail. Or I was telling Liza, I have a sister with blonde hair that's long, and then I have a sister that's got dreadlocks. And so Black people have been known for having creative hairstyles because that's how we're creatively expressing ourselves. But oftentimes we are discriminated against in the workplace. And so what we do is we assimilate into white culture, which means we straighten our hair to fit the mold. And so I was telling Liza that I'm often having these conversations with people that I know who worked in corporate America. I was having a conversation with one of my sisters recently, and she was like, well, I know what I'm dealing with, so I got to straighten my hair. And just to even have to feel that way, to assimilate, is something that Black women have to face. So yesterday when I was explaining it to Liza, and she's like, well, my daughter has curly hair. And then Megan, the director of marketing for Style Blueprint, said, yeah, I'd never wear my hair curly to a meeting because I just know that
That's how my daughter is. Like everything that's like super fancy, she straightens her hair, and she has like the curliest hair that you could have as a white person. I mean, it is so curly. And she's like, no, it feels more polished and everything. And I thought, I hadn't put that to the next level of what it's like to be a Black woman, feeling that there are norms that you have to
adhere to.
And I just hadn't, because I hadn't had to deal with it.
So I brought up the example of when Juliana Rancic said that Zendaya, who was a Disney star's hair smelled of patchouli and weed because she had dreadlocks. Because this is a stereotypical example, which I was bringing up in the beginning of this PowerPoint when I said the failure to communicate because of stereotypes. But Juliana Rancic didn't have a failure to communicate. She just said it. But she said it based off of those stereotypes. And this is another reason why it's important to do the research and understand that this isn't okay to have to have these microaggressions. And if you see this in the workplace as a bystander, it's time to step up, it's time to step in, and it's time to say, this is not okay. Juliana Rancic did apologize, and she did, to my knowledge, go and start the learning process of black hair. And so I don't think she's ever going to say those things again. And I think this incident, because it was so public, also taught people that it put it on the forefront of people's mind that this is an issue that Black women are facing. If white women, like Liza's daughter, like, well, I can't wear my curly hair because it's not as polished, then what do you think that is going through a Black woman's head when she's walking into an interview? I didn't start wearing my curly hair until I was probably 26 or 27. And at that point, I'm like, I didn't even know I had curly hair because I've been wearing it straight my whole life. And so I also brought up the Crown Act, which I don't have time to go over today, but it is a law which is going to protect women against women and men against hair discrimination. It is legal in 8 states right now, and they're pushing for all 50 states. But I don't have much time to go over that either. But I do have it here. After this, we are going to send out the PowerPoint for you guys. But that is just a couple of examples.
And I love how you said, if you hear that microaggression, to call it out. And I will say that I know that, gosh, I think it was like 5 years ago, and it was Megan, actually, who you referenced before, our director of marketing. She said to someone else who worked for us at the time, I remember that person said something to her and said, well, not to be racist, but blah, blah, blah. And I can't remember what it was about. And Megan looked at them and said, but that is racist.
Yeah.
And it was like, and they were like, really? And they had a good discussion about it, but I was so proud of Megan for saying that.
Oh, for sure. And I just got done reading White Fragility, and she also mentions what it's like to be a bystander and having the courage to speak up and say something. It just looks different and it feels different. And I think, again, you'll start to, in that moment, you may feel overwhelmed with saying something, but say something because you're changing a life that's, like I mentioned before, is going to change the domino effect trajectory of it. Also, advocate for your Black colleagues. This just goes back to authentic allyship within the workplace. If they have presented an awesome idea, don't claim that as your own. Go and present it as is such and such gave this idea. Oftentimes, when I was in my role and two Black people in a department of 100 people, I needed people who were willing to advocate for me and say, well, Jasmine had this awesome idea. I needed people who were willing to go out on a limb and claim it as my own, because I'm the minority in this situation. I'm a minority as a woman and also a minority as a Black woman. And nobody wants to go to the party alone. We all want to go with a group of people that love and adore us and will speak for us.
Yep. Love it.
So we're going to go right into the business marketing aspect of it. And so the Black buying power, 50 million Black people in the United States, and Black consumers spend more than $1 trillion a year. So having representation in your marketing efforts across the board is so necessary. Making sure that if you're going to include imagery in your social media campaigns or email campaigns or your traditional marketing campaigns, that you have representation there. Again, Black people tend to buy products and services that we have seen testimonials about. Liza and we even started this whole conversation. I'll let her tell you how we started the conversation, and then I'll follow up afterwards.
Well, so Jasmine and I originally met a couple of years ago at a WeWork. Who was it was Square. Square was putting on like a panel of people from around Nashville, and it was partnered with WeWork. And they had this really lovely dinner that they videoed. And Jasmine was there, and we were sitting at the same side of the table. And I just really just liked her so much. And just, we casually kept in touch. But from that, I was able to reach out to her when I saw her talk about on her influencer side of her business, partnering with a brand that expected her to be able to pull in all this $1 trillion of Black spending money to their brand, and wanted her to do the work, but they weren't doing the work on their side. So they gave you a few weeks. And even though there was some purchases, they were like, well, this isn't working. Because when you are able to bring in your audience and you like the brand, and you like the clothing to their platform, but then there is no representation on their platform at all, there's a disconnect. And so you were talking about, well, I'll let you talk about what you were talking about, but we were not going to mention the brand, but it really hit home to me, just another level of discrimination that you're having to deal with when, again, they're not doing the work on their own platform.
Absolutely. So this particular brand was not featuring anyone Black, and my audience is 75% Black when I break down my demographics. And so, I mean, if I'm expected to sell something to an audience that's 75% Black, and then most of my comments or most of my feedback from my consumer base is saying, but they don't have anybody who looks like me. There's no Black people. There's no body types that even are similar to the body types of Black people, then you can't expect to sell or to market to a vast audience if you're not including them in your marketing materials. And which brings up cultural appropriation as well, making sure that you have Black people in your marketing departments, or you have Black friends or a Black consultant that you can ask for cultural appropriation tips, because a lot of times brands will get themselves in trouble by just assuming and just going with it instead of actually doing the research, like I mentioned before, and learning what's the best way to communicate to the Black consumer base so that we can get a little bit of this $1 trillion that they are spending. So I wanted to provide you some examples. So Allure catches hell for teaching white women how to get an afro. Obviously, back to the hair topic, white women's hair does not naturally do an afro, as does Black women's hair. So this is a way that they were using cultural misappropriation. And same thing when Gucci apologizes for using blackface. So I'm using these examples as just two examples.
And that says 2019 on the Gucci, and when was the Allure was recent as well. I mean, this isn't like, when it was like, oh, it's really hard to get a diverse group together. It was 2019. I mean, you could even email out an idea and get people to respond. It was really shocking, I thought.
And there are also other ways. You can do focus groups, you can do surveys. I mean, there's a million different ways in which you can gather the information that you need to make wise decisions and be culturally appropriate. So again, I think it's taking advantage of the fact that everything is at our fingertips. We have Google right here. We have articles, you've got books, you've got podcasts, you have friends, you have kids that go to school with your kids that you can invite over for dinner and foster conversations after you've created relationships. So again, it's about making sure that you have the representation and then that you're also being culturally appropriate. Also, I think it's important for all businesses to create strategic planning that's inclusive of Black culture and holidays. So this year, after the George Floyd incident, we did see companies that were now acknowledging Juneteenth, which is the official day of slavery ending for Black people that we know of. Also, Black History Month has been a major holiday. I mean, it's a major month for Black people. Also, Black Music Month is in June. I really want to touch on Black Business Month because it's in August. And for those of you who are business owners or those of you who are wanting to patronize Black businesses, this is the perfect time to do it. If you're a business owner, I'll just give you a couple of examples in which you can work with Black businesses. You could even do some sort of partnership with a Black business where let's say you owned a clothing store and you wanted to bring in a local fashion designer, find a local fashion designer. Let's say you are a interior designer and you wanted to start using Black artisans to start to style your clients' homes. There are ways in which you can partner with Black businesses for a Black Business Month. And again, we all have social media, so find some Black businesses in your respective area and begin to promote those on your social media. Today is July 29th. You got a couple of days to get those lists, to do that research, and then to start to put them into action. Let's say you own a some sort of boutique and you want to highlight a Black jeweler. There are tons of Black jewelers there. Let's say you don't even own any sort of boutique and you just want to support a Black artisan. Target has tons of, well, not tons, we can't say tons yet, but they've got tons of products by Black people, but they actually just put in I read an article that said that they were doing some signage to showcase Black creators products that they sell within their store. So you'll even see corporate companies starting to partner with Black artisans to get their products and services in their store. Let's say you are a hairstylist and you want to, again, the cross skill set training. I was telling Megan that I went to, years ago, I went to JCPenney when they had a salon. Do they still have salons? And I got my, I got my hair straightened by a white woman. But I did ask her, I said, can you do Black people's hair?
Yeah.
And so she said, yeah, I've done Black people's hair before. And she showed me some pictures. So I think this is the perfect opportunity while we're quarantined to even learn different skill sets and, being able to, our hair is different. It requires different products and different techniques and different things. And so it was nice to even, that I had to ask the question, which I think is okay for us to have these dialogues. But again, for Black Business Month, there are a multitude of ways, whether you are a hairstylist, a corporation, a small business, or just a patron in order who's wanting to support Black businesses. So,
well, and I'll tell you, my ignorance is, and I mean, but we said that we were going to be open and that we might get negativity if we say something that people are like aghast at. I did not know that Black Business Month was in August. I didn't know that. I knew everything else on here. I did not know that.
Yeah. Again,
that's great. I mean, I'm in media and I didn't know that.
Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important to like create a strategic plan. So I know not everybody's a big corporate business, but creating Q1, Q2, Q3, Q4, this is what we're going to do. Let's say we're going to highlight a Black business every quarter, if that's what we're going to do, or we're going to highlight a Black artisan in our media, in our magazine every quarter. Or Style Blueprint has a store. Let's say you want to do for Christmas, you want to highlight a Black artisan in your Christmas collection. There are a multitude of ways that you can incorporate Black business.
And I do want to bring up real quick, because as far as also just tangible things to do, that I know that I've heard that, and I've seen it also, that some people will get called out on social media when they haven't had a record of being as visually diverse as they would like to be. And now they're starting to be, but then they'll get called out for that. And, I think it's, when you think about changing your message and being more inclusive, if you get called out for something and you're uncomfortable with that, it's okay to be uncomfortable. And going back to what you said about great things come from being uncomfortable. My daughter is at the Naval Academy and they have a saying, embrace the suck, because right now for plebe summer, that's what it is. But such great things come from it. So when you start to change your message, look at where you're going and don't get bogged down with, hey, you might get some negativity toward you, but that's just part of the growth, and hopefully you're not, and people see where your heart is. But if you get a negative comment, don't let it stop you. Keep going.
Not at all. You should totally keep going, because I gave this example the first time Liza and I talked, but nobody wanted to sit at the lunch counter and get beaten so that we could all eat lunch together. But Representative John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis did it. And they were at Fisk University here in Nashville as college students when they did that. And so no one wants to be stoned and no one wants to endure the pain of it, but you can't not go through the pain of the situation. You have to understand that for a lot of Black people, this is our lifestyle every day. When we're considering what hairstyles to wear to work, what way I want my photographer to shoot me,
What did you say? Because I didn't know that. It was something about you have to be really careful about how modest you are in your photos because a white woman can dress a certain way and not get the backlash that a Black woman is dressing the exact same way.
Yes, it is not perceived the same way. And so I have these conversations all the time. One of my photographers is a boudoir photographer, and she posts all her boudoir photos. And I'm like, girl, have at it, but don't ever think that I can participate in that, because I cannot. I can participate in private, but it's perceived a completely different way. Even amongst Black people, these are conversations that we have to have. Feminism, a book that I highly recommend is Hood Feminism. I actually just finished it.
Hood Feminism?
Mm-hmm. Hood Feminism. And she talks about the feminism that Black women embody in comparison to that feminism that white women have. Give me just a second. My washing machine is going crazy. I hate to stop this, but it is going crazy. So give me 2 seconds.
So we did have the question here that says, does it seem disingenuous to celebrate Black businesses in August? So Jasmine, we had a question. One was a question about authors. And so I just want to let everyone know we do have resources at the end. So we are addressing that. Does it seem disingenuous to celebrate Black businesses in August? Won't there be some sort of, why don't you celebrate Black businesses all year? And, you know, we'll both answer that. But for me at Style Blueprint, we really try, like with our faces, to be very inclusive, which is our Monday interviews, to celebrate Black businesses, yes, all the time. And we even, of course, right now have more of an emphasis on it because why wouldn't you? But I get worried that if someone doesn't want to use this Black Business Month to have that be a catalyst to start and think, well, why don't you celebrate it all year? Maybe that's your catalyst to use that as your launching pad to start celebrating Black business all year.
Mm-hmm. I think it's completely okay to say that in the past, we've not celebrated Black businesses, but we see going forward that we are going to change the trajectory of our business, and we are going to start having more partnerships. Starting today, we're making this an actionable, intangible thing that you're able to see. And we're hoping that our audience is going to keep us accountable to continue doing that moving forward. Because the problem with it is that after the George Floyd, and to even have to refer to a person as a George Floyd incident is painful in and of itself. But that was the turning point for a lot of people to see that happen. And so people immediately put out blank statements. And I think in order to combat the blank statements, you're going to have to tell your audience, give audience stake in your business and your marketing control, and let them know that we're going to make a difference. The brand that I mentioned earlier that basically chastised me.
That won't be mentioned.
The brand that won't be mentioned, the one that chastised me, and I essentially, had to take my video down and all of that. They are still not making any changes. They put out a statement and they said that they were going to be more inclusive and they were going to show more representation, and they have yet to do it today. But I think when you as a business owner or marketer say to your consumers that you're going to do a better job, and then you give them a stakeholdership and you say, keep us accountable, keep coming back to us, you're fostering conversation and trust that's going to continue to be full circle. The ecosystem is moving at this point. And so I think that you have to just address it as this, the offense has to go. You cannot move forward if the offense is there. We know what we haven't done in the past. We're very well aware of that. But today is the day that we're going to do something different. Today is the day that we're going to, this is the month that we're going to turn this around. So moving forward, September, October, November, and December, and January 2021, when we're all hoping for the apocalypse to be over,
right.
it's going to look much different. It starts with you being, first of all, transparent and honest and addressing your networks and how cross-racial they are. And then saying, I'm going to make a difference and I'm going to do this publicly. And then actually putting the action behind it. So do you have marketing people in your department? Do you have Black people in your marketing department that can speak to the culture? Have you hired a consultant? Have you invited those kids over for dinner? Have you invited the parents over for dinner? Have you started to put in place? Because here's the thing, we don't owe social media our lives either, but we do owe ourselves a lifestyle change. So I think you have to do the work behind the scenes, and then you won't even worry about those comments that you're going to get in front of the scenes, because you know that you're doing the work. So,
Exactly. And it's like, you know what? You can judge me today, a year from now, judge me again. It's just like, let's put the work in. But again, you have to start somewhere. Don't let the fear of not starting make you not start.
Absolutely. And branding 101 is, brands change their logos 1,000 times. Even if you look at the evolution of Nike, or you look at the evolution of any of the brands that you've seen, they've changed their logos, they've changed their mission statements, they've changed their vision statements, they've added things to their bylaws, they've addressed issues within their organizations. Nike this year put it in their protocol that they were now going to celebrate Juneteenth. They've never done it before. So right. I think it's, as in the digital landscape, everyone has the opportunity to change what they're doing. You can change your strategic plan as many times as you need to. As an influencer and blogger, I may make a content calendar, but the content calendar may be interrupted when we have major news happening like coronavirus, or when I have to shift the narrative. So for instance, my husband and I went to Miami for his 30th and our 3-year anniversary, which was in June. And people were like, why are you traveling during this time? And so I wrote a blog post entitled how to safely travel during coronavirus or COVID-19. And I gave like 6 tips on how to safely travel as a germaphobe like I am. And I think it's like you being able to craft your messaging down to the T. But you can't craft your messaging if you don't understand the context, you haven't done any history, or you haven't done the actual movements to make it happen. So some of the tips that I was given in that blog post, I was like, make sure that the resort or the hotel you're staying at has a protocol. So the resort we stayed at had a protocol. So I linked the protocol. Make sure that you pack as little as you can. Go through TSA pre-check if you have that option, so that you don't have to touch a bunch of stuff. So I'm giving just that as an example of being relevant to something that's going on in society.
And it also reminds everyone who's listening, you know what, Jasmine is more than her Instagram page. She has an amazing website, so be sure to check that out as well.
Yes. You guys, we are running up on 12 o'clock, so I'm going to keep
and I want to give everyone a heads up. We are likely going to go a little bit beyond 12 o'clock, but we will get this link. I will send out the whole recording. We will get it up on our Style Blueprint YouTube, so you can watch it there. But we are going to, just keep moving along through this. So hopefully we won't go way too much over 12 o'clock, but we know that people just slotted an hour. But don't think you're going to miss any of the conversation. We hope you tune back in and watch the rest of it on YouTube, but we are going to keep going along. All right.
Absolutely. And to those of you who I interrupted with my washing machine, I'm really sorry. He had something to say, apparently. So anyway, highlighting and supporting Black businesses, we've gone over quite a bit of that, but I also included a study in here. So it is linked. So when they send this out, you'll have access to it. But between 1997 and 2017, the number of Black women-owned businesses grew by more than 600%, compared to just 39% for white women-owned businesses and 114% for women-owned businesses overall. So what I want you all to take from that is this is a strong sisterhood of entrepreneurship and creativity and empowerment. And we all have to do this together. because we are the minority as women, but we're clearly the majority when it comes to actually implementing and making business strategies happen. And so I think we're a lot more powerful as a sisterhood than we think we are. So again, fostering those cross-racial relationships in order to support Black-owned businesses and elevate your business in general is going to be huge. I said to Liza when we first talked about this slide that empowering a Black woman, a Black-owned woman's business, it's going to empower an entire family, which empowers an entire neighborhood. So there's a trickle effect to this. It doesn't just stop with just one Black woman. You're also showing the kids that they can grow up and be successful Black business owners. They don't have to just be one of two Black people in a marketing department. They can own their own business. You're giving people the opportunity to grow their businesses, but also grow their societal, break those stereotypes and showcase what this looks like as a sisterhood. So having a lunch date, doing that skill set exchange, fostering the relationship, explore partnerships, host cross-racial events, inventory establishments. Let's say you want to carry Black woman-made candles in your business or vice versa, or you do some sort of collaboration and you name the candle after both yourself and your Black business partner. Let's say, for instance, you want to franchise something, a part of a Black woman's business. Let's say, for instance, if you want to, you're going to recommend Black businesses on your social media. You're also patronizing Black businesses, or you're donating to the business. So we are now in a time when investor relations are huge. And so you'll see people they're going and they're pitching their business ideas. Even if you watch, what's the TV show, Shark Tank yeah, so you're seeing that Shark Tank, and even they are pitching their ideas with the hopes of investor money. So let's say, for instance, if you wanted to invest in a business and become a stakeholder in that business, there are opportunities out there, as you can see, because Black women grew their businesses by 600%. That's a huge percentage. So I think it's so important to acknowledge that the sisterhood is very much so stronger when we do this together. Let's keep going. Family, community, and volunteerism. So
I just also wanted to encourage anyone, please ask more questions because we will address those too. So, okay.
Absolutely. Family, community, and volunteerism. So the conversation of changing racism and being inclusive of diversity starts with you and at home. And so diversifying your book collections. I don't know about you all, but I have been reading books like no tomorrow since the beginning of the apocalypse. So I have been doing Audible. I have been ordering books in the mail. I'm like, Amazon has delivered to my house every day. And so
you give suggestions, right? I just want to make sure at the end of the slide, there's book suggestions and author
suggestions. I didn't do book suggestions. I did podcast suggestions, and I did some museum suggestions. And some
you have some author suggestions?
I do have some book suggestions. I can add those in before we send out yeah, I'll give you some book suggestions. But diversifying your book collections as adults and for your children, also diversifying TV entertainment. Don't get caught up in a show because of the stereotypes that are, in one show that are offering stereotypes of one Black family. One thing that Black people loved about TV shows in the 90s is that they did portray Black families a little bit different versus a lot of what we're seeing with reality TV. Reality TV is it's stereotyping our stories more marginally. And so diversifying your TV entertainment is huge to me. My husband hates reality TV shows. I love it. It's funny. But I think just not just watching one news station, watch different ones. Not just watching watch something else, or watch a podcast or listen to a podcast, like diversifying your media in general, having frequent conversations about race relations with your immediate family. You live with them, you trust them, you fostered a family unit. So have those conversations even with extended family members as well. Start with your family if you're not comfortable with external conversations. Volunteer as a family at organizations. Tennessee is known as the state of volunteerism. And I have to say, anytime you volunteer, you are you're in an element where you cannot help but to have gratitude and appreciation for what you're doing for somebody else.
Right.
And so I think in general, volunteering as a family is such a huge thing. And Nashville was so awesome when it came to volunteering during tornado relief. We all showed up and we all showed out in terms of volunteering. People had their families out there and in all areas that were affected in Nashville. So they actually had to start turning people away. But there's this level of volunteerism that teaches you a lot about how to communicate with people and how to understand people's circumstances and their needs during different times. Mentoring a child, adolescent, college student, young professional of color. Again, maybe if you are a CEO of a company or if you're a director of a marketing department. I was volunteering at a school here and I was for career day and I was telling the kids, I'm a marketing manager. And they were like, what's that? And so they were like, are you like a YouTube star? And I was like, kind of, sort of. In my personal life, I'm kind of like a YouTube star, but I'm a marketing manager and these are the components of my job. But how will they know that unless I am mentoring or offering that information up? And also being very clear and also being relational to what they know. Like as a younger marketing manager, I was able to convey to them that while I'm not a YouTube star, I'm something like it. And so I think it's being able to have those relational conversations, but I understand that this generation, that's what they identify with is YouTube. That generation. Yeah. This is a group of like 6th and 7th graders who knew that YouTube stars were even going to be a thing?
So, I know. I remember the first time I heard the term YouTuber and I was like, what? Yeah.
And even when I was in college, and I'm not too far removed, I graduated in 2011. But again, offering that opportunity, my best friend and I, she's a tech guru too. And we say all the time, how did we end up in the tech world? Like, how did that happen? Like, nobody told us what a tech job was. I don't know any Black people who work in tech, let alone anybody who works in tech. And so we're both like, we don't know how we got into these positions, but since we are in these positions, we're definitely going to use what we know to help other people. We graduated from a predominantly Black high school in Jackson, Tennessee, which is now closed. And so we'll continue to do what we can do to foster any sort of movement and knowledge of our career so that other young Black people know what they're capable of doing. So,
great advice.
Healthcare. So COVID-19 is a pandemic, but African Americans have faced health disparities for years. So supporting Black clinicians in their practices. So I mentioned earlier that Meharry is the largest producer of African American dentists, also African Americans with PhDs. These students are getting out and they need support as Black clinicians starting their practices, donating to Black medical schools. Black medical schools are generally not getting the type of funding that you'll see at a predominantly white institution. And so donating to their scholarship funds and other things would also be very helpful. And again, investing in one Black student who's going to school to be a doctor is going to invest in an entire community. One good thing about Meharry Medical College is a lot of those students stay in Nashville or in the rural areas of Tennessee to practice. And as you know, Tennessee is a very long state. It literally takes about 8 or 9 hours to get from one side to the other. And we have a lot of rural areas. So training up Black physicians to go into these areas and serve underserved communities, not just Black communities, because a lot of rural Tennessee is white communities. They are white communities is so important and vital to all of us. Volunteering for Black institutions. Like I mentioned, Meharry's leading the COVID-19 testing efforts right now, and they are constantly looking for volunteers to man those stations. So here's an opportunity if you're in a Nashville or surrounding area to jump in and volunteer to help. Understand and support nonprofits that support the health disparities that Black people are facing. So the American Heart Association does their largest women of color breakfast right here in Nashville at Meharry Medical College every year. And they have around 400 to 450 people each year. Every year it's a goal to make it even larger. So I worked on it for 4 years when I was at Meharry. And the goal was to raise thousands of dollars that would go back into research and combating the health disparities that Black people are facing in regards to heart attack, stroke, or any of the other issues that are relative to the American Heart Association. And a lot of times we would look for sponsors, corporate sponsors and individual sponsors. During the breakfast, you can also donate, but it's getting involved in nonprofits within your community that will also serve and protect the health of Black people, because Black people's health is not just a Black people problem.
Right.
It's everyone's. It's healthcare is an ecosystem. You've got insurance, you've got the healthcare issues, you've got the clinicians, you've got physicians. Dentistry is also a huge part of healthcare. There's so many different moving components to it, and we are all active in that ecosystem. Insurance is an ecosystem. So, and as we know, over the past, let's see, 10 years or so, universal healthcare has been a major hot topic for us, and how we are all key players in it. So understanding some of the health disparities that we face and the historical context behind them too, which I don't have a lot of time to go into. But for instance, in a lot of areas where you have underserved communities, you also don't have access to certain resources that would provide better healthcare. They don't have the best gyms, or they don't have organic grocery stores or things of that nature. So what you do end up with more health disparities in those areas. But there's also historical context that goes behind those. So doing that research is also very necessary in terms of understanding and supporting the Black community. And I know I put African Americans on this slide. African Americans are Black people who are born in the United States. And the reason it is better to address Black people as Black people is because nowadays we are living in an era where people are not all from Black people are not all from America. Black people are from Africa. They're from Jamaica. They're from Germany. They're from Europe. They're from everywhere. And so we have to address it as Black people when we're referring to the vast group of people.
Well, and I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that's another thing that I've seen called out a few times on social media, is when someone is showing their support and they will use the term African American, which in the 90s was really like, you didn't say Black, you said African American. At least that's what, as white people, we heard. Like, this is what the term that you used. And I remember seeing someone who was really called out, like very much called out. Well, to start with, learn your terminology, get it right. And I was like, oh, well, there's also someone who's younger may not realize that this is what we were told to say, and we thought we were being respectful, but it's also up to us to realize that terminology changes, just like when there's terms that I don't like someone using for a woman, for me, that someone may have been fine with, you know, like in the 60s, oh, get your girl to do that. And that was like your, assistant. And it's like, don't say that now. Well, same thing happens with language when it comes to communicating support for another race.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there are issues that African Americans specifically face. And so it is still an appropriate term to use, but Black culture is inclusive of multiple different cultures. And so.
Oh, it's a subsection. So, just for clarity's sake, Black is the umbrella that covers all, and African American is a vertical within that.
Right. Absolutely. So as we wrap up, here's some podcasts that I mentioned to listen to. So to learn more about America's Long Shadow of Slavery, 1619 is a vivid recount of it. I absolutely love the podcast. I thought it was very well articulated, and she really walks you through what happened when our ancestors got on the ship and what happened when they got here. And so if you're interested in learning more about slavery, it is a very intricate way that she's communicating it. It's not a it's not an antagonistic approach by no means. It's almost like listening to her is like listening to music as she's describing the long shadow of it and all the effects of it. And she really gets you into the into the emotions of what it was like. Like I can feel what she's saying when she's talking us through everything from when my ancestors came over from Africa to the United States and where we are at current. Learning more about race relations, Code Switch is a really good one. It's hosted by journalists of color, and it tackles issues of race that we're still facing. And then Higher Learning with Rachel Lindsay and Van Lathan. She was the Bachelorette, and she's got a really good pop culture perspective. So I also thought that these three were really good. But as Liza mentioned, I do work for iHeartRadio, and we did implement a Black culture section of the podcast, which I was the one who facilitated that. And so if you go to iHeartRadio and check it out, you will find a ton of other podcasts that are also relevant to Black culture. And then And then some museums to learn more about Black culture. I mentioned if you're in Tennessee, the National Civil Rights Museum, or if you want to fly, I am here for travel as long as you go read my blog post and take all the safety tips. But the National Civil Rights Museum is right in Memphis, Tennessee, and then the Equal Justice Museum and Memorials in Montgomery, Alabama. So if you're driving down to the beach, just make sure to schedule a drop by the Equal Justice Museum and Memorial. And the National Museum of African American History and Culture is in DC. However, all three of these museums do have some online learnings, and there are opportunities for you to get involved, even volunteering to these museums, volunteering and donating at these museums is sometimes an option. So I would say make sure that you are also physically going and seeing these artifacts, because I think it helps you really put things into context even more too. And then I know Liza was mentioning when Black people say, well, why don't you go do some research? Here's a way for you to do it that is fun, also educational. And nobody's too old or too young to walk through a museum and see the real life artifacts and learn about these historical events in history and how they've affected all of us. So, the National Museum of African American History and Culture in DC, I have been about 4 or 5 times. I learn something new every time. I have different feelings every time. I'm processing and I'm leaving and doing even more research every time. And this is coming from a Black woman. So there is so much that we're all, even though we're living in current times. And my grandmother always, whenever I ask her if she's going to go see, if a historical Black movie comes out, I'm like, are you going to go see this? Like when Selma came out, my grandmother said, no, I'm not going to see that. I lived it. And so I think when we think about how we're going to move forward with race relations, there will be a movie called 2020, because 2020 has just been too epic for us not to have a movie called 2020.
Yeah, it'll be a 48-hour movie.
Yes, it will be. But how many of us are gonna want to see it if we haven't done anything to be catalysts for change in the midst of it? And so I think it's so important for us to be active in the midst of it. Do the research, learn the stories, boldly share the stories. So I put some articles here that are relevant to the teachings that I presented today. Brown versus Board of Education, Jim Crow laws, learn more about the Memphis State 8, who paved the way for me, racial microaggressions, working at the intersection, what Black women are up against, Diverse Intelligence series. It was marking the breakdown of the Black buying dollar. That was a marketing study done by Nielsen Ratings. So we're going to send this out. I'm going to add one more slide in that also gives some books to read. I was asked on a podcast, well, not a podcast, an Instagram Live recently for some resources and of how I learn or process all of this. And I said, well, I do think while resources are good, I feel like talking to people in person in our day and time is a much better resource, because I think it's far-fetched sometimes for me to talk about slavery to someone, to my white friend who says, well, I didn't own any slaves. Why are you talking to me? And so I think it's easier for that person to digest the information if I speak from my current perspective, where I say, well, I was dealing with this brand and they told me that I didn't sell enough for them. And so I tried to educate them by telling them, in order to sell to the Black community, you're going to have to be more inclusive of Black people. They did not want to hear it. So as my friend, how can you help me carry the torch to get this done? So even though we have all these resources, you've got the articles, and I'm not deterring anybody from the research here. You've got the articles, you have the podcast, you've got the books, you still have to live. So you still have to cook dinner for those cute little kids at night, and you still have to have this conversation with your spouse. You still have to have these conversations with your sisters and your aunts and uncles. My aunt just ran for Congress in Indianapolis. This is her second time going. She did not win this time, but next time we're going to get her inaugurated. And just seeing her run is motivation and inspiration to keep going. I was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation intern when I was 20 years old. So I might run for office one day, and just seeing her be able to run that race is helpful. So me telling my story to a white friend and saying, well, when I was a Congressional Black Caucus Foundation intern, I worked on this legislation to do X, Y, and Z. It puts it in a more relevant context than me just talking about the historical things that have happened to my ancestors.
Right.
So I think it's so important for us to be having the conversations cross-racially, in person, over the phone, over dinner, over lunch, over coffee, in order to make some effective changes. Because know the history, but know that it is still affecting a lot of us today.
Yeah. Thank you. This was wonderful. I hope that everyone who tuned in enjoyed this as much as I did listening to you, Jasmine. And thank you for just opening yourself up and helping a lot of people with some real steps, because I think that there's a lot of messaging out there to get started, but there's not a lot of messaging about here are some steps to take. And as people, we all know that when we can follow some steps and start doing it, that's when our next idea comes. But we just want to, be able to take that first step, so many of us. So this was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being open to having the conversation on that rather large platform, and being brave enough to endure whatever comes to us after this.